I'm very honoured to come after Mitu, who is absolutely a leading light as far as I'm concerned, and very, very approachable. So follow her on Twitter and ask her anything you want. But I'm very happy to be here because I'm going to take you through all of that story because I saw the title of this, which was Get Into Game Dev. And I thought, you know, the question that I'm asked all the time, I took on this job as chief exec of a trade association, which sounds so dull. 2 years ago in January it would have been. And lots of people say to me, gosh, that must have been a bit of a change for you. You know, games. And it's like, and I've always struggled with this question because I don't understand why people think that it's such a different area that I've gone into, and I'll explain why in a minute. Just a little bit about what UKIE is. So we are UK Interactive Entertainment, so we cover the whole of the UK in terms of representing the games industry, because our key aim is to make the UK the best place in the world to make and sell your games. So we do a lot of political work. We've lobbied for the tax breaks. We got the change in Scotland. You're lucky because you have curriculum for excellence, but in England they have shit, boring ICT on the school curriculum at GCSE level. So we lobbied the government, and I'll go through that in a little bit, to get the change to Michael Gove, Mr. Latin, to say coding is important. And now our next step is to make sure that you also get coding and art together at GCSE level, because that is equally important. So we represent companies, whether you're a small startup, micro studio, as we call them, or the biggest publishers and format developers and platform holders in the world, like Sony and Microsoft, as well as companies like UKIE, and then everything else in between. So we're here for every company that's involved in interactive entertainment. And I call it interactive entertainment also deliberately because I think the changing nature of games and how you define a game is really interesting at this point in time. So we're not for profit. Everything we do is all about supporting the entirety of our fantastic industry. That's my team. We're quite a small team with really large heads and tiny bodies. And that's me, because I like cats. I don't know if you can see this. So this is all the boring stuff. This is, essentially what we do. So how do we do what we do? Well, we help people, especially when you're starting out. We have lots of graduates and lots of people who come out of university or want to do a placement, or doing a placement year, and find it hard to actually get a placement in an existing big AAA type traditional studio. And this is why it's exciting at this time, because the technology, the access to players, to markets, to do something different, to set up on your own, the opportunity is there. And we find quite a lot of people are being quite entrepreneurial and thinking in their third year placement, instead of going to work for a studio, I actually want to do my own thing and set up my own studio. So we help small companies, we help any kind of company that's at startup stage to access things like money. We arrange discounts, we put them in front of the media, we talk about them to politicians, we take politicians to see them, we try and make business easier in this country. So that's what if you're interested, I can talk more about that, but I think that's quite the sort of dry stuff. But it's incredibly important. And things like the tax breaks, which we're lobbying Parliament and Europe for, is incredibly important for every single person in the industry, no matter what stage you're at, because it will give you the ability to maybe take a risk on doing something that's more culturally relevant to you, or to the audience that you want to appeal to. So more British games will hopefully come out of the tax breaks, which is basically a tax relief on production. We do this thing, which is like a year in pictures, which you probably can't read at all. I can send you a link. But we do a lot of things, and a lot of that is also including, making introductions to people. People need to network, and that's a crucial way to actually build your knowledge, is to ask other people and to ask them how they overcame an issue or a problem that they encountered, whether that be in running a business, or whether it be in actually getting a game to market, or actually being able to get it to scale to that massive success. I'll go into a little bit more detail about some of the other things as I go through. This is our office. We have an office space in London. I'm sorry we don't have an office space in Scotland. We would dearly love to. but we try and make this space a place where people can come and hot desk, they can work, they can use it. You know, this is for the industry, and hopefully, if you ever come down to London, you can find a space and work here. But it's incredibly important because this is a way of people being able to be amongst other like-minded people, or different kind of people, but people in the industry. And again, to be able to do that sort of informal networking. So people have their own events here. If you're a member, it's totally free to use. You don't need to pay anything. Anyway, boring stuff over. No, it's not quite. So we also do things like, one of the big problems we have in this country is that we have a lot of official stats. And I remember a really interesting one that came out, I think it was last year, about the Scottish games industry. And because of the way that these official industrial stats are counted and measured, and the way that companies are classified, and by the way, if you're a startup and your turnover is less than something like £75,000 a year, you don't even get counted in official stats. And there was this report by, I think it was Creative Scotland, that said that basically the games industry didn't exist in Scotland. That's a load of nonsense. So we try and help and support endeavours like this was Develop's 100 publication, which was fantastic, because this was about identifying the top 100 growing and interesting studios in the country and mapping them. That's very important, because we can take that to international investors, or we can take that to the government, or we can take that anywhere and say, look, there's a lot happening here, and this needs to be supported, and you can do business or deals with people who are outside of London. Because there's this big kind of narrative about, oh, all the innovation, and especially tech innovation, happens in London, in Tech City. And it's just simply not true, and we know that. We also do things like just promoting the industry. So, again, this was a multi-million-pound campaign from the government, the English government, that was trying to, off the back of the Olympics, create this massive buzz and all these big posters in places like the New York subway in Japan to celebrate how creative and innovative the UK is, and to come and do business in the UK. We've got fantastic talent that you can hire or work with in the UK. And we realised, and this was all about, you know, celebrating UK creativity. And we looked at these and we thought, so where are the games images? Where are the games businesses in this? So we actually shoehorned into the campaign, which is now used globally, some of our best known UK produced products, like Sackboy, which is incredibly important. And people don't realise how important this is, I think, sometimes, because as soon as you're in front of people's faces, people take notice and they go, hang on, okay, so what is going on in Britain in terms of some of the really interesting creative projects? We also have just started, we haven't launched this formally yet, but we've just started a student membership scheme, because we are really conscious that there is this lack of support and struggle to get industry connected with education, and whether it be in colleges, universities like this, or indeed at school level, because that's when people start to form opinions about what they might want to do and start to understand what they might be passionate in. And so we've devised this kind of scheme of support, which will be launching properly. I think we've got about 6 institutions signed up already. And it's the institution pays for you, okay, to be part of this network. And what we try and do is offer as much support as possible, whether that be through mentoring schemes, through introducing you, connecting you to industry people in an easier way, to do big events, and to have some practical support, like Skypinars. I don't think that exists. Does that exist, Lee, in
Skype in the classroom.
Oh, okay. I prefer Skypinars. I think that's a good one. Microsoft should adopt that one, I think. And we're talking to the likes of Twitch TV to do sort of live streaming of talks, because if you can do one-to-many, then that's really effective. Okay, so one final thing about UKIE. We run the Video Games Ambassador Scheme as well, which is a STEMnet scheme, so that's about getting industry people into schools, into colleges, to evangelise, and especially to girls, to say, this is cool! We have some here, we have some in the audience, not girls, we do have them, Video Games Ambassadors. And really, we're the front door for that, so we hope to build this network so that we can help you all support each other. and learn from each other, and again, have this bank of resources that you can use when you go into schools and talk about how fantastic coding, art, and everything else to do with the games industry is. Right. So, I'm going to give you a little bit of a sort of journey, which I haven't done before actually in public, so I was a bit nervous about this, but this isn't my dad, this is Henry Andre Lefebvre, and I've never pronounced his name orally, you know, I've never said his name out loud. I've read it, and I've written it, because this man, so I did geography, and I was taught by a lot of feminist geographers, which you think, what's a feminist geographer? Never mind. And I did geography at Edinburgh University, and I absolutely loved it. And at the time, it was all about, you know, the seat of the Enlightenment project. You know, we looked at the philosophy of geography, why geography is a thing, so why people went out and mapped the world and discovered and named things, and how town planning, it sounds really boring, but how buildings were created in a way, or how towns were planned in a way that regulated behaviour, particularly the behaviour of women, which was very interesting at the time, but I won't dwell on that. But what I was interested in, and what I was taught, my discipline was all about the use of space. And this man was a very, very influential writer in the work that I did. And in about 1990, because he was all about the production of space, and the reproduction of space, and what we do with space, and how we turn it into a sense of identity and a place and community. And at the time, these things, so when I was a student in 1992 to 96, I did my undergrad, we didn't have nice laptops that we could easily afford. In fact, no one could afford laptops, okay? You had to go and book either the Apple Mac or the PC machine in the library, and you simply were not able just to take a laptop and go and use public Wi-Fi and wherever you had, the bus stop, and do it. And this wasn't very long ago, let's not forget, right? So we had these things, and this was a very grainy picture, not mine, and I don't think it is the one in Edinburgh, judging from the reflection, but Siberia internet cafes. Internet cafes were suddenly popping up all over Edinburgh. There were about 3 or 4, and this was when I was in my 3rd year, so 1995. And I thought, this is interesting. And I used to go to them. And I used to sit there and watch people. And die! What the bloody hell are they doing? And they were playing games. And they were talking. And I used to go into the computer lab in order to write my essays to word process them. Because I was the first year that we had to word process our essays. And I used to think, what on earth are these people, even in the computer lab, doing laughing at these basically blue screens? And I realised that they were on IRC, and they were chatting. And so I got interested in these kinds of spaces, and the spaces in the machines, right? And I was thinking, and I was translating what I was learning in geography to these sort of virtual worlds, to these socially networked online spaces. We didn't call them that at the time. We called them virtual communities. And I decided to do my undergrad dissertation, to the horror of my feminist geographer supervisor, who did not believe a word of what I was saying, right? I decided to compare these spaces, because they were interesting. They were highly public spaces that people were going into, yet they were connected to sort of semi-public or privatized spaces through these machines. And I called them, they were liminal spaces, which is a thing in academia, and I compared them to sort of 19th century Parisian salons and coffee houses where mostly men, because the women, as you can see, were sort of shoved to the back of the bar in a special corner. Mostly men went and debated political issues. It was a public domain, it was the agora, it was the place where debate and discourse happened and issues were talked about. And I thought, these internet cafes are kind of like these spaces, and what's happening in these virtual places are probably like these spaces. So this, now, at the time, this was like a bulletin board, or a forum, right? These are all the trolls. So I did my dissertation on that. And bear in mind, so this was the time, I used to use this in every presentation, and then suddenly it became really dated, because this came out, I think it was about 1995, 96, on the internet, No One Knows Your Dog, and I loved this. I loved this cartoon. And so I was still at that time, I was kind of exploring this space, and the only people really who'd written about virtual worlds were Sherry Turkle and Howard Rheingold. Yeah, I also discovered that, and this was MySpace time, so MySpace obviously very sort of early, and then Friendster and Facebook and social networks became a thing. But I love this map because as a geographer it does appeal to me again, which was a map of online communities. I can't remember what date this was, but you can date it by definitely post 1995. Post 2005. But even that has changed. But I realised even before all of that social networking, so just to rewind a bit. So I did my undergrad, I then did an MSc in research methodologies, qualitative research, just to get more points, because another feminist supervisor at the time who did believe what I was doing handed me a feminist science fiction book called He, She and It, or Body of Glass, and said, read that, you need to do a PhD on virtual worlds and social virtual spaces. And so I did, very nervously, because I wasn't a first student, I wasn't a grade A student, I didn't know what the bloody hell I was talking about, but I knew that there was something interesting happening here. And as I started in my research and just examined the whole world of MUDs and moods and all these social virtual worlds that came before social networks existed, which were game worlds, and it was play, and it was all about role-playing or puzzles or problem solving. And I found this absolutely fascinating. So I did my PhD, I stopped that in 2000. I thought, what the bloody hell do I do with this now? I don't know what to do with this. And I found a job by looking through The Guardian, because in those days you could actually get a job by looking at the newspapers and applying for things. And I ended up being a researcher for BBC Newsround. I'm like, oh God, what am I doing? I moved down to London because they were interested in creating a virtual world. They were interested in how do they make news appealing to kids, to 9-year-olds, to 10-year-olds. And so they wanted to build this online world. And every news story we wrote, which had to be, the first paragraph had to tell the story, and you weren't allowed to use long words or anything like that. I mean, you're trying to describe, at the time, things like 9/11. I was a journalist at Newsround during 9/11. It was extremely tricky. But with every story that we wrote, we would always have an interactive element. And whether that be a vote or a quiz, whatever it would, the recognition was there that play and fun can go with serious news stories. So this is the only image I can find. This is the first game that I devised. I didn't create it. I learned HTML when I was using home site, and that's what I remember, just having to publish stuff, and then the whole page would be blank. It's like, where's that missing bracket? And trying to go, I don't know, I'm not a coder. But I did devise a game, and it was to get kids interested in environmental issues and poaching in particular, because we did a lot of news stories about animals, as you would expect, and poaching and endangered animals. So this one was called Poacher Patrol. And so we had someone at the BBC who actually coded this up and created it in Flash for me. But I thought, okay, what do kids like? I was talking to someone over lunch about this bizarrely. Kids like poo, and kids like pee, and kids like vomit, especially 10-year-olds. So let's devise this game where the poacher has to battle this poo being thrown at him or her, and shit's fine, and vomit and crocodile spit, and battle these things. And it was brilliant. I thought, this is fantastic. This is how you do games that get people interested in an issue. You know, you start with poo. So just don't quote me on that. So I then went into, if you like, grown-up news. I graduated, if you like, from Newsround, and I went to become a technology reporter for BBC News. And I was still obsessed with social virtual worlds and game worlds and playful interaction and the potential of them. So I would always volunteer. I said, this is something really interesting happening over here in this game. Because the BBC at the time really struggled with, and they still struggle to be honest, but they really struggled with, how do we do games? We said, what do you mean, how do we do games? Well, we can't really just do straight reviews. So I would have to sort of find a way in to be able to cover these amazing worlds that have been created, amazing products that have been created, and not make it a review, and find a really interesting angle. So, you know, things like pupils learn through Mist game, virtual gamers reveal themselves. That was a particular project that I loved because it's this photographer who went around the world photographing people in their meat space and photographing their avatars in whatever game world that they were in and whatever game they were playing. And that was really fascinating to see for me. And then I also had to cover these ridiculous things, which, you know, this is 2005, still happens. Actually, no, sorry, that's a positive one. I thought I had one of the negative ones, which was basically Hollywood attacks the games industry and blames the games industry for shootings, which still happens. So I got really interested, and I made sure that I was covering these really interesting aspects of game worlds and social worlds, and the reasons why people loved to play World of Warcraft, which wasn't necessarily because they loved raiding. It was because they wanted to hang out with people and meet people and get married and so on. And that did actually happen, of course. And then I thought, you know what? I'm not a journalist. I never trained to be a journalist. I sort of fell into tech writing and being a journalist because of my interest, because of my passion about this medium, and not just online, but about these social interactions, about game worlds, about playful systems. I was just obsessed with it. So I went to work for a think tank, bizarrely, who was interested in doing how do we use the internet and social virtual worlds to increase political engagement, particularly amongst kids. How do we get young people to vote? And I really struggled there because while at the time, this was 2006, I was interested in, Second Life and the potential for political engagement and really interesting things happening in this kind of social virtual world, including people, you know, practicing their raid, rehearsing their raid strategy before they moved out of Second Life and then went into World of Warcraft to actually carry out their raid. But as well as that, you know, these kinds of political events. I remember sitting and watching, I was quite drunk because it was after closing time and I'd come back home and I thought, oh look, there's a big Supreme Court judge doing a live stream in Second Life with me there. I got one of my questions answered, I can't remember what it was now. I'm not proud of that moment. Anyway, I thought this was incredibly interesting, but while I was interested in this, they were interested in really dull stuff. And they were sort of far behind, I think, of the curve. So in 2006, they were interested in bloggers and blogging. And I'd spent sort of 3 or 4 years kind of writing about that and talking to bloggers and, you know, getting news stories from them. And I was sort of moving on. And I remember one occasion in a pub, it was an event run by the New Statesman, I think, and it's called New Media, New Politics, Where Next? Where I presented the potential of game worlds for engagement, okay? Not direct political engagement, because that's not the way to do it, but as places where the audiences that they want to reach are hanging out and doing politics, just not the kind of politics the Conservatives and Tories, they're the same thing, and Labour Party think is politics. And I got this guy who absolutely went, games were all about big tits and guns, how dare you say there's no politics that happens in games? And I remember just being, that was my first kind of face-to-face trolling that had happened. And I was like, well, that may be the games that you're playing and that you like to play, but that's just not, you know, what other people are doing. There is a potential here. And if you, don't give this guy any more Google juice, but that whole episode is still up online and it bugs the shit out of me. So after that, I went back to the BBC. Because I was like, this think tank world is not for me, man. They do not get the potential of playful interaction. They don't understand these worlds that people are inhabiting by their absolute millions. These people, the people that they want to be engaged in issues, and to be, moved enough to actually do something like vote. They just don't get it. So I was attracted back to the BBC, and I went into my role as commissioning editor for multi-platform entertainment. And I was like, great! Entertainment! Multi-platform! Games! Because entertainment's fun, right? And entertainment is full of play. And you've got game shows. Huh? Game shows? Nope. The closest we got to being able to commission anything remotely associated with a game was the Apprentice Predictor. So I was looking after things like Strictly Come Dancing, which I hate so much, and Apprentice, which I do love. And this actually wasn't commissioned by me. I commissioned the second version of this, but I did commission a play-along companion app for Strictly. And the problem was that, BBC is fraught with difficulties. If you want to find out more, never work with the BBC if you're a games company. Sorry. Actually, no, sorry. Gosh, I shouldn't have said that. I don't mean that. But their attitude towards games was really like, no, games are played by kids, games are frivolous, and if we do games, we'll distort the commercial market. And I just think it's not the correct way to see the potential of these playful systems. So at least I got to do that. And then I got a call from Alice Taylor, who, if you don't know, I'm going to feature her company later on in the presentation. I'm probably running out of time now. And she said, dude, you're really frustrated at BBC because you can't commission interactive comics, you can't do the stuff you want to do, like games. Come and work for us at Channel 4. So I did. And what was delightful was that I was an education commissioner. I didn't have digital or multi-platform or anything like that in my title. And before I arrived, she'd already commissioned some awesome things like Privates. Anyone play Privates? Play Privates, it's brilliant. It's a sex education game. But you wouldn't know, it's basically Call of Duty in the vagina. We had some very angry women who told us in the forums that Privates was basically making women's bodies dirty in some way and just demonizing women's bodies as them being diseased. And so we had to do a penis level. So I actually was in charge of the penis level, which was extra downloadable content. And basically the way that we did this was, we didn't go, right, we're going to make educational games, because I think that's a really redundant term. What we did was we'd brief out basic issues. We'd identify what 14 to 19-year-olds really cared about in their lives by doing some research with them, by doing surveys, by talking to them, by hanging out with them, by talking to experts who worked with them as well. And things like body image, things like global economics, things like history were really important to them. Things like bullying, things like that transition when you go from little school and being a big fish in a little pond at 10, 11 to 12 years old, and you're suddenly a little fish in a really big pond, and it's this massive transition to secondary school, and bullying happens and it's dreadful. So we commissioned all these fantastic, I think, games, and they're fantastic because the education was baked into the mechanic. Okay, so we use every single game is a learning system. They have inputs and outputs. You're learning as you go the consequences of actions, and you're forced, in a way, because it's designed if it's well designed, to move on and be motivated and to do trial and error. And they teach you about failure in a really good way as well, which at school we're not very good at teaching kids about. So yeah, one of my favourite examples, and I'll say why in a minute, is Sweatshop. And the brief that we gave out to companies was to help teenage boys and girls understand that buying really cheap clothes is not necessarily a great thing. It might be cheap, but that's because they are made sometimes by children in not very good conditions. And what we wanted to do is not have a moral judgment about whether sweatshops and child labour was good or bad. We wanted the game to play out and to be designed in a way that whatever the decisions you were confronted with as you played the manager of a factory overseas, you understood the different kind of pressures, the system in which that person was making these decisions, the system in which they were operating. And, you know, culturally, sometimes we're a bit biased about things like sweatshops, but child labour is wrong. And actually, we forget that, you know, up until quite recently, we had children in factories. And actually, what's interesting is, when you start to dig deep into an issue, you find out that, you know, culturally, things are different sometimes. And if you give people access to health and education and choices, then that's a better system sometimes. So, Liminal, which is unfortunately a company that's just gone under, and they were one of the best companies I ever worked with. They're Brighton-based, and they won the pitch for this. And essentially the game mechanic was very simple. It was, at the time, there were quite a few tower defense games that were becoming popular on iOS. And we made this for the web first, free browser-based game, and imported it to iOS, which is a different story, which I'll go into in a minute. And it was essentially a tower defense, tower offense type mechanic, so you could understand the mechanic. We were very explicit in saying the humour had to be kind of really cheeky and really dark, because again, that's what would hook me as a teenager in, and we know that's what hooks people in to comedy. And the script writing was absolutely fantastic in this. And this was one of the key, I think, to the game's success, was the script writing and the pace of the game, and the ability for it to be a recognisable kind of game mechanic that you didn't need to have a tutorial level for. So I'll just show the trailer for it. I got a cat in every game. That was also in the brief. We also wanted blood, a lot of blood spurting out. The music is available for download for free. So on that, we worked with experts. With every game we did, we worked with experts. So we worked with Labour Behind the Label for this one, so that we were interspersing some, you know, true facts as you were waiting for the next level and so on, and as you sort of found out your scores. Now, what happened next was really interesting. So this was really successful as a free browser game. And when I left Channel 4 in end of 2011, Little Loud were in the process of porting the game to iOS and Android, because they then wanted to make it a freemium game. So they wanted people to download it for free and then make microtransactions within it and monetize it that way. So they did that, they ported it, it was an easy port. And then, Apple removed it. I'm like, what? Why has Apple removed this from the store? It was approved, it was up there for a bit, then it was removed. And Apple, in its guidelines to developers, say this, direct quote, "We view apps different, sick, than books or songs which we do not curate. If you want to criticize a religion, write a book. If you want to describe sex, write a book or a song, or create a medical app. Don't do it in a game." Now, you know, this is not the first time that they've banned a game and they've taken a game off the App Store. because they think is just a little bit too close to the bone. Syria Endgame is another game that they took off the App Store. And I think this is really interesting because I think games are the perfect systems and the perfect places and the perfect canvases to make a critical issue, to have critical. It's a pile of poo, what they say. Should have seen the Google images that came up with that one. Because, how am I doing for time? Does anyone know? 2 minutes, oh God. Because way back when, so I don't know if anyone recognises this is electronic arts. This was then, I think 35 years ago or something. These are the founders, right? This is the motley group. Look at them. Look at it. I love this. The little leather studded thing. This was them, and they set up, this was their newspaper ad when EA launched, okay? And they called themselves Electronic Arts for a reason. Because they said about the computer and games, it's a communications medium, an interactive tool that can bring people's thoughts and feelings closer together, perhaps closer than ever before. And while 50 years from now its creation may seem no more important than the advent of motion pictures or television, there is a chance it will mean something more, something along the lines of a universal language of ideas and emotions, something like a smile. What you guys are doing in terms of crafting this medium is very powerful and world-changing. And now you have so many ways in which you can reach different audiences with this language, with this canvas, with the things that you're trying to do when you're creating a game. We have this whole world of opportunity. I wish I was a student now so that I could take any of these devices and not have to go to my library and have one solitary computer sitting there that booked out for months in advance. There is so much potential, and the really fantastic thing is those tools like Unity and other tools that let you code or let you access, let you develop in an iterative way and quickly are much more accessible than they were. And of course we have, this is one of my favourite images from Grand Theft Auto, not perhaps the one that usually most people choose. We have this fantastic heritage and fantastic industry and creativity in this country. Scotland! This is the birthplace of games. Grand Theft Auto, the fastest selling, biggest selling entertainment product of all time. We beat regularly, we beat film, and we beat TV, and we beat music. And it's our job to make sure they know that. We have other great British-made examples. We have the fantastic Marvel Lego, I like that one of Hulk on the toilet. We have Batman Arkham City. We have Soho Studios, Microsoft doing fantastic things with the Kinect. We have Moshi Monsters, and we have Frontier. We have these fantastic creative products that are potentially world-changing. We have Media Molecule making things like Tearaway, doing some completely different innovative things and crossing over into the physical world with their papercraft. We have small studios like Fireproof Games who are doing fantastic little games like The Room for £50,000, reaching massive audiences. We have international success stories that are trying to do something different with games and game mechanics and providing a different kind of immersive experience, like that game company, which did the absolutely fabulous Journey. And other smaller titles that are doing the same kind of thing, that are really experimenting in these social virtual worlds and spaces. That was the way. And I like this, if you haven't read Eric Zimmerman's manifesto for a ludic century, please do. He says, like, making music, telling stories and creating images, playing games is part of what it means to be human. Games are perhaps the first designed interactive systems our species invented. And if anyone tells you any different, refer to the turd. So just very quickly, and then I'll finish. So what are we doing about it as an association? Well, apart from me sort of ranting at people in the nicest possible way and making sure that other film industry, TV industry, music industry realises the potential here, and politicians do. Off the back of this report, which was Next Gen Skills report, which was co-authored by our Vice Chair, Ian Livingston, who's a living legend, we started something called Next Gen Skills Campaign, which was to change the curriculum that I mentioned earlier, which we did. Now it's time to make sure that we are evangelising every one of us into schools making sure that people understand that programming is a meta skill, it's a life skill, it's a way of problem solving, and it's an approach to problem, it's an approach to a way of thinking that is critical for every single one of our industries. And when we have things like the Raspberry Pi floating around, and we have things like 3D printing, and we have kids getting their hands on with electronics and making shit, and we have, the ability to produce the stuff that they design in 3D programming and 3D print it and have it in your hand. That is incredible, because I'd love to see what happens then when that generation grows up and does something with these things that's more than just putting it on a thing. Sorry. Which is great. I mean, what it does is great, but Maker Lab, Alice Taylor's company now, Alice left Channel 4 and said, look at this, I'm off to do my own company before I'm 40 and I've got a kid and I want to do my own thing and I want to dictate my own terms what my kid plays with. So she started a 3D personalised doll company and game company called Makey Lab. And Makey dolls are designed through, you design your avatar and your doll online on your app, and it's got space in its head for lily pad Arduinos. It's got space in its limbs so that you can put wires in it. And you've got people like Predator, that's Ian Hughes, doing things like this. Now I know it seems a bit, silly, but amazing, isn't it? He's making his Makey doll into a controller. And when you get tinkerers and people, this is my favourite one, when you get people just being inspired, especially girls, into going, do you know what, I want my really nice doll that looks like me to have these big bunny ears and make them move and do stuff and respond to sound. You can. And that's why they want to learn the language, to make them do shit. So I can't wait to see, like Me Too, the kinds of things that you guys produce when you think not like Business Cat, inside the box, but outside the box. The world and the canvas is there, and we have such powerful tools at our fingertips to do something different and to create what you're passionate in creating and changing the world while you're at it. Thank you. That is a link to our annual report, which is probably not very interesting, but it's there. Thank you.